Introduced today by Abhimanyu Radhakrishnan. Please make them very welcome.
Hi. Sorry, can they lower the lights? Lower the lights.
Good morning. What a terrific way to start the weekend. Thanks all of you for coming for the opening session. Pleasantly surprised that a 10 a.m. session is so well attended. I'm very quickly going to introduce Nassim, and using a leaf out of his own tool book, I'm going to introduce him via negativa, so what he is not, because he's been a bit perturbed by some of the introductions he's got. So firstly, he's not an economist, although he likes talking about economics a lot. He's essentially a statistician. He started his career on Wall Street, was a trader for a couple of decades, so made his money there. His first book called Dynamic Hedging, if any of you try to read it, unless you're in mathematical finance, it's going to go whoosh. And his first popular book, of course, was Fooled by Randomness in 2001. And then the big book that we're talking about, The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable, came out in 2007. But I thought I should just do a quick reintroduction of that because yesterday a couple of people, when I told them I'm doing the Black Swan session, they told me, oh, is that the book on which the movie is based? And I had to say, no, nothing to do with ballet.
No, say yes, say yes.
Or maybe, maybe Nassim's been telling people yes, and that's why we have so many in the audience. So of course, the Black Swan was about unexpected events. And in a slightly unexpected event, what started happening after that was that Nassim began, of course, to become famous because the financial crisis happened. And then people started introducing him as the guy who could predict Black Swan events, when the whole point of a Black Swan event is that it's something that fundamentally cannot be predicted. And so Nassim, I guess, in an effort to counter this, decided to write another book, and that's called Antifragile. The Amazon bookstore here denies its existence, but there's very much a book called Antifragile by Nicholas Nassim Taleb. And that book actually is the discussion about how to deal with black swans. If there are events that fundamentally cannot be predicted, what you can do is just make your society, your nation, your economy, yourself, build a system that is comfortable with volatility, even benefits from it. So even if you can't predict, you're okay because you're safe. You've not built yourself into a stage where volatility or an unpredictable event can cause catastrophic harm. So on that note, the path from the Black Swan to Anti-Fragile, I'm going to let Nassim take over. And about 25 minutes, half an hour into that, we'll start questions as well. Nassim.
Hi, I'm extremely honored to be here, and particularly to be on stage. And it's a nice, unpredicted event that
you can say fanboy.
Would have a friend introducing me, and someone who has sympathetic to some of the ideas I have against what I call science. Can you hear me? Oh, okay, all right. They're asking me to be louder, okay, maybe because of interference. Can you raise the volume on your end? Okay.
Can people in the back hear Nassim clearly?
Yeah, they can hear.
And show of hands in the back, please.
They can hear me. In the front, they can't hear me. Can they hear me now? Okay. So, I'm trying to do something here, and I lost my file. So I have slides, so I just look at the pictures and figure out what to talk about, because you understand, there've been, a lot of parties here, so you sort of, anyway. So I'm not going to talk about the Black Swan per se, because I don't consider it a self-standing book. There's a collection of 4 books called the Incerto, a philosophical treatise on uncertainty. In parallel, I started writing, and now I'm volume 2, a mathematical version of it that's completely unreadable. But when you write something that's unreadable on the side, then somehow people pay more attention to when they're reading the other one, all right? So it serves the purpose, but so I had to go through all this stress to finish mathematical, like something like 500 mathematical pages, and publish them in journals, so people don't read them, right? So anyway, so let me start with the story of the black swan, and you'll understand that living in India. Before I talk about the bird or anything, let's discuss the following. I think I'm hearing, but the thing is loud over there. Okay, all right. So let's assume that we collect randomly 1,000 people from India and bring them here, okay? You pay their flights, of course, okay? And you put them on a scale. You measure their weight, total weight, and then you add to that sample the heaviest person you can find in India. How much of the total will that person represent? Not 3%. 3% means he has to weigh, sorry? 0.3%, okay, 0.4% maximum, okay? All right, so it's very simple. As you increase your sample from 1,000 to 10,000, the largest person will represent 0.03%. So here we realize that there are domains, and I call these domain Mediocristan. It's a Hindu name that I picked years ago, not knowing it was a Hindu name, Mediocristan. Mediocristan is a domain where the exception can occur, but it won't make a big difference. Okay? And there's something called the law of large numbers that's the basis of all science, that as you increase your sample, you go from 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000, disturbances vanish completely in the roll. So it's a collective roll of the middle. Now, the same sample, 1,000 people randomly selected in India, they're here, you add to that sample the wealthiest person in India. He may be the heaviest one, but let's say, all right, let's assume it's different, okay? So how much of the total wealth will he represent? 80%, come on, be aggressive. How
You
much
don't have to
is he
name
worth?
names, just the number.
20 billion versus probably you have 15,000 or 10,000 net worth for the rest. So there are basically what he spent on his plane coming here or running here, all right? So 20 billion versus almost nothing, all right? So this is pretty much a domain I call Extremistan, where the extreme is the only thing that matters. So that's the domain Extremistan. So let's, welcome to Extremistan, because in winner-take-all effects, you see, these events play a larger and larger role. So if you take, for example, opera, we had a singer here, okay? If you take opera singers in the 18th century, 19th century, they can't really sell their performance beyond a small circle. So the income of the superstar in Milan versus someone in a local village, the differential is not big. But when you move into the audiovisual age, then they're competing, with someone who doesn't have to perform. So the differential in income becomes monstrous. So it goes from 4 to 1 to 10,000 to 1. You see, that's what's happening. Another thing about the globalization accelerating the role of these rare events is just consider we're at the literary festival. I know in the English language, last time I checked, about a few years ago, there were about 1 million manuscripts on the market by people who call themselves authors but typically work for Starbucks in the US. I don't know what they do in India, all right. So about 1 million of them, they have the great American novel. There's 1 million manuscripts in the English language, all right? Of these, how many will be published by a non-self-publishing house, do you think?
10,000.
20,000, say, all right? But however you define a publishing house. So of these, so the million, you start with 1 million, the total sales will come from how many authors?
Apart from the 50 here, I don't know, maybe.
Depends on whether the lady from Edinburgh is on the market that year or not. Somewhere between 5 and 35. You have 1 million authors, between 5 and 35 will have half the sales and the bulk of the profits. So this is really Extremistan. So that's my idea of the black swan, is that you have to specify domains in which the exception matters a lot. Okay? So some people who studied a little bit of philosophy mistake it for Hume's problem of induction. It had nothing to do with Hume. Plus, Hume's problem is not Hume's, by the way. It was much more developed, much more, in sectus empiricus. Some people mistake it for Popper's asymmetry. Popper's problem is not Popper's. It was much, earlier in history and presented by a fellow called Favier, all right, a French guy. And then if you go in the statistics, there's something called fat tails. Again, it's not quite, so, and these branches don't talk to each other. So I was presenting very simply a synthesis of what to do about that problem. And let me give you that metaphor. A turkey is fed for 1,000 days by a butcher. And every day confirms to the turkey statistics department, the turkey's government civil servants, who tabulates things, the professors, all that work for the turkey, every day confirms that the butcher loves turkeys with increased statistical significance. So every day we have confirmation that butcher loves the turkey. Butcher loves turkey every day. There's a day in America where it's never a good idea to be a turkey, around Thanksgiving. So that day, the turkey will have a surprise. It will be a black swan event, significant black swan event. Now, it's a black swan for the turkey. Is it a black swan for the butcher?
No.
No. Is it a black swan for you? No. So the whole idea is not to be a turkey. That's my whole problem. That's the idea of a black swan. But people weren't quite getting the point. And incidentally, I had so much mail because scientists suffer from a certain problem. I won't mention it, and I will not pathologize it, but they don't have usually very developed theory of mind. They think that there exists a universal definition of what a random event is, when in fact, philosophers understand that it's epistemic. It depends on your body of knowledge. A black swan for the turkey, as we said, is not a black swan for the butcher. You see? So when people tell me, is this event a black swan? Is September 11 a black swan? Something that nobody could see coming. See, of course not. It's not for the pilot of the plane. The guy going into the tower knew where he's going, right? So it's not a black swan for the terrorist, but it is a black swan for those in the tower. You see? So now this problem, so we have a combination of things. So let me sort of, summarize by telling you that there are random events that are very, very, very hard to predict, but that's not so much, the problem. The problem is that they play a very large role in the total. You see, if you take the number of people who died in wars, right, just a couple of wars, represent the bulk of people who died in wars over the past 200 years. If you take companies, if you take wealth, people now are ranting, they're not very happy about the fact that 80 people are wealthier than bottom 4 billion or something like that. So you see, so it's very hard to forecast some classes of events that play a very, very large role. And if you miss them, you're not going to get anything right in the long run. So that was my point. So there are domains, socioeconomic domains, in which it's literally a turkey problem to forecast. But yet now, the treatment in the black swan of the psychological biases, okay, I started, wanted to mention a footnote, and it developed into, I don't know, a third of the book. That we really, not only, it's a quiz. People cannot forecast, because unless you forecast that rare event, you're not going to get anything. Yet, people don't forecast a rare event except ex post. After the fact, they think they did forecast it. Why? Well, unfortunately, we have many historians here, many of them are my friends, but historians play a large role in this bias, newspapers and historians. Because the historians writing the history, looking back, all right, not running it forward. If you view events running forward, for example, the world would be very different. And let me explain. If I look at wars that happened in the past, of course, I say, oh, it's very easy, they're predictable. Why are they predictable? There was tension before every war, you agree? So it makes them very predictable. But two things, all right? Nobody at the time has ever been really able to predict some were able to predict the first war, but not how acute it was going to be. And the second one, if you run history forward, you realize that typically tension doesn't lead to war, tension leads to parties, where people, 90-some% of tension, okay, people make up and then they have champagne. Diplomats getting together and getting drunk, and that's why diplomats were, coming from the upper classes, incapable of doing anything other than get drunk together, right? So if you look back, every war was preceded by tension, but if you look forward, every tension is not succeeded by war, right? So that's the problem in looking at history. And it's the same thing. We call it retrospective predictability. So black swan events, when you read books, if you go to a bookstore and buy many books, they appear to be very predictable. And from the press, because ex post is very predictable. Like the crisis 2008, now it's very, very predictable. Everybody, but did you predict it? How do I know someone predicted it? I want to see a checking account, right? If you're so smart, did you take any risk personally for it? So that's sort of like the idea of the black swan, okay? Let me stop here and move to the next book, because the next book for me is vastly more interesting. I'm even more convinced that it's more interesting than the black swan, because Amazon here doesn't have it, right? So even better. Because now okay. So the Antifragile was the answer to that problem. I discovered the following, that there are two kind of systems, two kind of exposures, two kind of individuals, two kind of things. Those that benefit from random events and those that are harmed by random events. It's very difficult to predict a random event, okay? But if you're, you can be robust to them, in other words, not harmed by them, or you can benefit from them. So it's much better focus on how events affect you than try to predict them. And you can classify events, whether they belong to extremistan or not, and see how you can protect yourself from them. A very simple example. If you have a lot of debt in a system, okay, the unpredicted will harm you. If you don't have a lot of debt, the unpredicted will not harm you, okay? So I come from the Eastern Mediterranean. We come with 2 kidneys, all right? Okay, I'm sure it's the same here in Jaipur, all right? Okay, we humans come with 2 kidneys, all right? Even in Russia, they have 2 kidneys.
Incredible.
Yeah, okay. So we have 2 kidneys. Why do we have 2 kidneys? Okay. If you have 1 kidney, you have to be very predictive of what can make you lose a kidney. And there are like 7 or 8 causes. Cancer, you can have a tumor, necrosis, your cousin hitting you, an animal eating, whatever, kind of food poisoning, all kind of stuff. You can lose a kidney, all right? But if you have 2 of them, you have to be less predictive of the environment. Okay, and if an economist was to design a human being, he would over-optimize and create a human being with 1 kidney, with 0 kidneys. You go take a bus and do dialysis. It's so inefficient to have a kidney. You only need it,
twice a day.
Well, not even, all right? So it's so inefficient. And then what happens to those, if there's a traffic jam, then part of the population exits the gene pool, all right? So this is the 2, and you can map that into debt. So not having any kidneys, like having debt. If you have debt, you have to be very predictive. If you have money on the side, I don't have to know what will cause a crisis. I don't have to read the newspaper to see what will cause a crisis, because I'm robust to it. Okay, so now I've defined the robust. That's the sort of, I put that in the 2nd edition of the Black Swan, because I was so angry with newspapers, because what happened is one person sort of read the book, but without paying too much attention, okay, wrote a book review, and 99% of the other book reviews was sort of like combination of this book review, all right, with some little bit of material added, all right? So this is what happens and actually it was described in the Black Swan, all right? So I was tired of the press, so I added a section explaining what the Black Swan was not, that of course, journalists didn't read, of course. And then I wrote Antifragile that could not be skimmed. You cannot get an idea of what the book is about from reading the table of contents. Okay. And the main chapter, to give you a gist of what it was, what it's about, it's called On the Main Difference Between a Cat and a Washing Machine. Okay. So the title will not lead you, even the subchapter will not lead you to understand what's in it, except if you map it. And well, effectively, there's a difference between the organic. It so happened that we have the organic, and you have the engineered. The washing machine is engineered, okay? If I bang on a washing machine, will it improve? Will it develop like a harder surface? Okay, no. So you want to leave it alone. So it wants peace and predictability. Well, it is fragile to random events. But my hand, okay, banging on it. If you do karate with your, what happened? My bone will get stronger. Aha. So we have a difference between two domains: the organic and the engineered. Okay. And then when you look at the difference, it's much deeper than that. But the bad news is that, when people who are in politics don't quite understand how the world works, because they mistake the cat for a washing machine. All right? And let me explain. If you have forest fires, all right, do you think nature has a command and control center, up there somewhere, in Russia or somewhere in
Bangalore.
In Bangalore, that decides on how trees should grow? No, nature has its own functioning, modes of functioning, organically, where it makes small mistakes and has, and improves through some mechanism, okay? So it's a live thing. So when we have forest fires, if you extinguish every forest fire to prevent nature, all right, if you decide, humans is gonna, we need to manage nature. If you overmanage nature, you extinguish every forest fire, what happens? A lot of flammable material accumulates. And then what happens when you have a big fire you can't control, blows up the fire. So this is what happened in 2008. If you deprive systems of volatility and they're organic, they get weaker. And then it accelerates black swan events. And that's what happened in 2008, because Mr. Greenspan said no more boom and bust in the economy. There's a guy actually called, what's his name, the fat guy, Gordon Brown?
The chancellor, yeah.
The chancellor, yeah. They had two of them. They had one guy who was devious but smart, and one guy who was nice but not smart, all right? Gordon Brown, all right. So he wanted to centralize everything, and he said, okay, the economy, no more boom and bust. You don't understand, if you have no more boom and bust, what happens? The weak companies accumulate, okay, and eventually you have a crisis. They blow up and they cannot recover. So, in short, we have a few minutes to talk about the antifragile. The book, my idea of antifragile is that you have to understand that some systems need what I call the disorder brothers. They need variability. They need, they're alive. They need life. Okay? They need the following. They're called disorder brothers. Variability. They benefit from some amount of variability, some amount of stressors, some amount of uncertainty, some amount of chaos, some amount of what is volatility, all these things. And of course time, because in mathematical treatment of time, we treat it like volatility. It's the same thing, okay? So what likes volatility likes time, what doesn't like volatility doesn't like time. So using this, I was able to classify things in three categories. The fragile, this glass, it doesn't want any volatility. It wants predictability, or it degrades with volatility. It degrades with error. It degrades with stress. The robust, like this table, doesn't care. And the antifragile, the organic, that requires some volatility. Like the forest, if it doesn't have fires, it gets weaker. You see? So, and then, I started treating the subject. along these lines. In my specialty as a trader, we actually focused on products that gain or lose from volatility. So we had, some kind of framework to work with, and I tried to generalize. People don't quite realize, hey, you know what? They go to the gym, okay, to exercise, but they don't want to be subjected to the stressor of a little too hot a temperature or a little too cold a temperature. They understand their problem in one domain, not the other domain. And so we have to understand this property of human nature. I gave it the name antifragile, and then you can map to risk-taking as well, is what tends to gain from volatility and has to have some attributes, is that you have more to gain from a random event than to lose from it. This has 0 to gain from a random event, all to lose from it. Some things have a little more to gain than to lose from random event, okay? And that's a quality of antifragile. And with this, we can talk about systems, how to organize systems, and typically the centralized top-down is more fragile than the organic, things that resemble nature, for example, and things like that. So I think by now, I gave, I hope you're a little bit confused by the anti-fragile, because that's its beauty, that's the anti-fragility of it, okay? People, and that's one experience I have, is that if you know exactly what an idea is about, you'll never read about it, okay? You think you know it. If it eludes you a little bit, you'll do your homework. Actually, that's the anti-fragility of thing. And effectively, as a speaker, if you understand perfectly or you can hear what a speaker does, or it has to say, you will focus less than if you have to make an effort. And that's called overcompensation, okay? And effectively, overcompensation plays a big role in life. You overcompensate by overshooting. To give you an example, everyone has heard of a condition called post-traumatic disorder, no? 100 times more prevalent is something called post-traumatic growth, where you overcompensate because you had a bad experience. So depriving people of some classes bad experience is not a good thing, all right? So post-traumatic growth, but people don't talk about post-traumatic growth. Why? I'm going to give you, there are 2 reasons. I'm going to give you the first reason is that since modernity, we humans have the illusion that we have to control our environment perfectly. All right, that's the first reason. But there's another one. What's the other one? What's the other one?
The pharma industry can't make money of it.
There you go. Nobody's ever going to make money treating you of post-traumatic growth. They're going to give you a pill for that? No. Post-traumatic disorder, hey, you need treatment, therapy every Friday at 2 p.m., for 6 years, stuff like that. But post-traumatic growth? Okay. So this is one of the biases. Anyway, so now to wrap up, I spoke about the black swan, unpredictability. There's more disorder. The world is vastly more uncertain than you think. Part 1, anxiety building, good. 2, it's not necessarily bad news.
Right. All right. So I'm going to take about 10 minutes to ask you a few questions and then throw it open.
Yes.
For a deeper understanding of how this philosophy helped Nassim in his personal trading strategy, I would suggest you read this book called What the Dog Saw by Malcolm Gladwell. So there's one chapter about...
He got it wrong.
Well, okay. It's a nice layman's example of at least your psychological effects of how you look at your trading screen. But I'm going to take it because all of us aren't derivatives traders and we don't have Bloomberg terminals to gain on the upside financially. Are there some ways to gain in the domains that we work in? So I'm going to start with one question to Nassim. How would, say, optionality be something we can leverage for, say, health?
Okay, so it's very simple. If you have more to gain, as I said, from any random event than to lose from it, okay, and other like trial and error. Trial and error, cuisine. Cuisine was built on this mode. People don't realize that our civilization doesn't come from science. It comes largely from trial and error, disguised as science. So if you're cooking, I want to make the perfect, or the best masala, with cucumber in New York. What do? You write down the equation on a board, and 2 or 3 PhDs, 20 PhDs will look at it, and then the committee will decide on how it's going to be. This is called the top-down system, okay? Top-down systems tend to make mistakes, all right? So that's a top-down approach. Or the other one is you add an ingredient, taste. you have nothing to lose, because if you don't like it, you give it to your mother-in-law, all right? So that's called trial and error. Small error, big gain, okay? And this is how society is through evolution. By the way, evolution is anti-fragile because it benefits from errors in the environment, all right, to improve. Or your DNA, even at two levels. One is the environment. Two, your DNA, you make mistake with the DNA. Mother Nature has something, in replication error. Like you make a photocopy, you make a mistake, no? Some mistakes benefit the progenies, all right? And then you have improvement. Some don't, okay? So this is a trial and error. So it looks like there's a big scam. I'm an academic, but don't tell my friends, all right? Because they already don't want to have lunch with me. When I go, to have lunch, nobody sits with me anymore. But I had this thing, I think it's largely a scam, this idea of science leading to technology. If you read the entry on a dictionary, what is technology? They say the application of science to practical life. If you look at the record, it's exactly the opposite. It's science comes from technology rather than the reverse. So there's this huge body of experimentation, trial and error, risk-taking when, entrepreneurship, whether in science, in doing your masala, in tinkering and doing things, okay, that leads to improvements rather than just study. So this is what I call optionality. You have the option to keep the masala or give it to your mother-in-law. You have choices. Nature has the option. When you have a genetic error, you see, if it's an improvement, nature has the option to keep it, okay, or that's it, you have dump it outside the gene pool. This is how nature operates. So this is optionality. So in your life, you should have optionality. Society should have optionality. So when you're on a highway, you're driving from here to whatever, to Istanbul on a highway, or if you have 0 exits, you have no optionality to change your mind, all right? But you're driving, you see a beautiful fort, or, you want to have the optionality to exit. Most people, when they go to Harvard Business School, that kind of nonsense, they start studying how, to make plans. So they get locked in the plans. In fact, real life doesn't work that way. So this is how you deal with uncertainty, with maximum optionality, maximum ability to change your mind, okay? To try to, hey, you know what? I'm looking for Peru. I find Argentina. So what? All right, not bad news. So you not have. So and research is the same thing. Anyway.
One of the themes in your book, since you mentioned science leading to technology or vice versa, is the difference between techne, which is knowing how, versus episteme, which is knowing why.
Yeah.
So we had a small controversy in the press, a few weeks ago about whether we were the first to think of the Pythagoras theorem or whether it was the Greeks or the Sumerians. But your point largely is that it really doesn't matter because buildings in ancient Greece weren't built with knowledge of the Pythagoras theorem.
Exactly. There's a big scam going on. You all learn Euclidean geometry in school, and it leads to these ugly structures that have right corners. But go look at Roman structures. They're built much better built than today's structures. Okay, the Euclidean geometry had been present for a long time. They're building all kind of stuff, aqueduct, okay, using technique, like cooking rather than theoretical, and they were a lot more robust. And effectively, before the so-called Arabic numeral, which in fact is Indian, all right, entered Europe, nobody could know how to make it to divide. You could divide, longhand. You could divide with Roman numeral. All right. So how could they could not use mathematics. So they're effectively building using a body of heuristics, tricks discovered through experience. The Romans were extremely anti-theory. Everything was built based on experience with optionality. So you see the structures are still around. You see, and if you look at, you don't have these geometric shapes that are actually, not so natural. Look at nature. Look at the tree. There's no corners, nothing Euclidean about it. And look at here, this artificial structure. So when the Romans were building, they're not building like this, closer to the other one, higher dimensionality object.
Right.
So now they say, who cares, Pythagoras? All these things are in science writers, make a big deal about science, all right? and they make it like spectator sport, you know, like this discovered this. It's like this guy climbed Everest. It's nonsense. In real life, it's made, development comes from a collective action of people tinkering together. And then sometimes, as I show in Antifragile, someone grabs it and writes, like for example, jet engine was discovered entirely by engineers, tinkering. And they didn't know how it worked, all right? Till later on, they still were flying using jet engines. Some physicist wrote a paper on it, and then people think now, they teach in school that he discovered it. It's the same thing with the Industrial Revolution. We had the steam engine. We had it for a couple of thousand years, 2,000 years, from the hero of Alexandria, okay, 1,800 years. But it was rediscovered entirely by non-educated thinkers. So this is why, you know, when you say education, there's a huge difference between technical education, high school education, which you should develop, versus university education.
And you're a big critic of university higher education.
Exactly. It hampers risk-taking. It makes people, it turns people into bureaucrats, all right? University education was something probably invented to make people bureaucrats or professors. So you become professors, teach professors. So go ahead, sorry.
Right. You know, on the sidelines, we're quickly discussing. So this philosophy puts you in the school of people who think it was a good thing that Socrates was fed the hemlock, right?
Yeah, well, no, there's discussant. I have two characters in the book. A guy called Taleb, all right, whom you may recognize maybe. And then there's a Fat Tony, all right? Fat Tony is a no-nonsense fellow also. So at some point, there was a thought experiment where you have Socrates debating Fat Tony, all right? And you take a book of Socrates in which he was arguing with a guy about definitions, all right? And Fat Tony looks at him. He tells him, does a child have to define milk so he could ask his mother for milk, right? You're confusing us with your intellectualizing of things, trying to understand stuff. Effectively, it's a little unfair because I was against the Plato's Socrates. The real Socrates was a little better than that. But still, that's the idea. And then Fat Tony tell him, you know why they put you to death? Why? Because you're confusing the hell out of us without helping us do things, all right? You're over-intellectualizing life. That's sort of the Nietzsche's approach to what Socrates said. He said, and that's the central point of Antifragile, how you probe uncertainty. What is unintelligible is not necessarily unintelligent. And that was a central point, is what you don't understand isn't necessarily stupid. Particularly, it has survived 1,000 years. So let me add one thing here. You remember I spoke about time? What likes time likes volatility. Or what likes volatility, I mean likes time, and vice versa. This doesn't like time. Not because it will degrade naturally, maybe there's part of it, all right? But because eventually an accident will happen and break it. So if you have things that survive, myths that survive 3,000 years, okay? They have to have logic of their own that we don't necessarily understand. So, and this is why when people were predicting the death of a religion, all right? There's got to be something to it, all right, that we don't understand, that maybe not, escape our logical faculties because we're not smart enough to understand that it helps us do something else that makes it survive. So, that was sort of like the idea in against intellectualization of things. And also, from my experience as a trader, you give someone a PhD, give them 2 years and 6 months on average, they blow up. And they blow up the whole firm. Okay, so this is why typically you don't let them get close to trading. And typically when I was a trader, we made sure that PhDs didn't have access to our trading floor. 2 separate floors with different cards. We can access their floor with our cards, although we're not invited to do so, because, but they can't come to our floor with our cards because they may help blow us up, okay? Particularly after some events in 1998. Anyway.
Okay, one final question from me, and this is a planted question. Nassim wanted me to ask this. So, therefore, why does all this mean that you don't like taking photographs or signing people's books?
Okay, no, when you become an author, then you have two personalities, all right? You have your personality with your friends, okay, and that's you, and then your personality in your books to communicate with the public. And then suddenly, if you're still producing, if you stop producing as an author, you want to have a public persona. But if you're still producing, You don't want to have a public persona. I mean, except to communicate, people to read your books. So this idea of signing books, fetishism, having my picture taken with someone I never met, can I have a picture taken with you, all right? You find it offensive. I don't have to explain it. It's not, you feel, read my book is my product, not this. And then people have this feeling, literary festivals are good because writing is a solitary affair, so you break your solitude, meet other people, get drunk, do things, hear music, stuff. But the idea of fetishism, this is why literature is bothersome, because a lot of it is fetishism. And people start writing your biography or biography of authors. And science should be completely anonymous, you see. That's the production, and this is where, you can link it to entrepreneurship, you see. Entrepreneurship is a collective action by a lot of people tinkering together, and one will win and it will help society advance, just like, heroism. So this is where I'm opposed to things that are, so in 2009, after successful Black Swan, started, hanging around with people and then stopped. No prizes, no honors, no causa, no nothing, no listing, no nothing, except to announce a book or maybe to connect.
Okay, so with that caveat, you're still free to try after the session. Questions? Anybody? Hands up, please.
The lady
right in the front.
from the beginning. She seems angry because of my attack on the university system.
Not at all. Thank you very much. This is very useful.
We don't hear you.
Oh.
Okay. And guys, we have very little time, so please keep your questions short. Yes, ma'am.
Sure. So I'd like to your help in walking us through how what you've just said helps policymakers. And let me give you a specific example. I have very good Greek friends, and they fight a lot. And they fight about, on one side, there are those that say, enough of the austerity. This has been extremely detrimental. On the other side, there are those who say, let's stay with the Troika's prescriptions. How would you walk us through that?
This is what I hate in life, is someone brings you a problem I didn't think about before and asks you to comment on it, and say what I can comment on, that you have to comment on whether gold is good or something like that. So this is exactly what, not my business, to comment on current events, because you have to think of something for 20 years before you can talk about it, okay? Otherwise I become what I call the BS vendors that you read in the press. On the other hand, I can talk about something about policymaking, that using the ideas of antifragility, you make a taxonomy of what countries fall apart and what makes them fall apart. Which is, debt makes countries fall apart, high debt. Centralization makes countries fall apart. But it doesn't mean you can be always, Singapore is centralized but it's small. So it's a notion of scale. There's something called allometry, how things scale. So you take an elephant, I saw one actually in a traffic jam the other day. So you take an elephant, and it was the first time I got so close to an elephant. An elephant, but actually an African elephant, they're even bigger, okay, compared to a mouse. They're not the same animal, okay, except bigger. So they have different characteristics. So what happens is that when you increase the size, you have huge economies of scale, but you become more fragile to random events. So if you decrease the size, which is why decentralization is important. One, you're distributing decision making, but also the errors stay local at the side. And then also finally, an elephant falls from here, is done. It breaks a leg, it's gone. A mouse, I don't invite you to try, but a mouse you can throw from up there and won't care. Will laugh at you, all right? So this is where, so you continue with this, what makes a country fragile or not fragile? So these are large parameters, right? But to me, I find it, offensive when I see an intellectual start making comments on current affairs, okay? Simply because, if you don't think about it, my idea that I never lecture at university about a subject I have to prepare for. Doesn't mean I don't have to prepare. It means that if you're not the person to talk about that if you haven't independently thought of the question. And the question of Greece, I haven't independently thought about it. So
quick question. Okay, somebody at the back, yes.
we have to be balanced in gender and also in hair. Okay, some people with hair, some people less hair. You understand, right?
Sorry. Good morning, sir. It's great to have you here. So, I am actually a practicing predictive model builder. So your ideas were actually very radical to me. So I just wanted to know that, you are more concerned with random events and outliers. But as humans, we try to rationalize things and we want to give things structure that we understand. So, what approach you suggest for predictive model building if we don't have a structure to it?
Okay, I suggest, I spent 20 years looking at, this I can answer, predictive model building. And unfortunately, all I can recommend is what Professor Makridakis, my colleague, who did his competitions and studied all these models, figured out that more complex models are a lot worse than simpler models. This you can derive. 2, macro models. This I've derived. Macro models don't work. Micro models may. And 3, if I were to give you a piece of advice, get out of predictive model building.
All right. Yes, the lady right at the back.
Hi. Your talk was very entertaining and very enlightening. But if I may be permitted to make these comments.
A question, please. No comments. If you can just frame it as a question very
You
quickly.
are an academic. I mean, you work in academia, and yet you are quite critical of the academics. I understand some of your reservations in giving credit to scientists, but I think, isn't it a sweeping statement to make that technology always precedes science?
Okay, I didn't say technology always precedes science. I said that science doesn't always precede technology. But the way I framed it is that it's called a bias. Okay, so largely what you think, we have a sucker problem. When in doubt, you think it's science that caused it. So I would say maybe 95% of what you were taught about science preceding technology is bullshit. It's BS. 95%. So there may be a 5% that holds. Like Einstein is among the 5%.
Right. She's also upset that you have a PhD and you're a professor at NYU, but you
No,
are
but
anti-academia.
I try actually not to teach students because I'm a researcher. So I write papers, right? I try not to reach students because I don't like students. They're in there like hookers. They come in for grades. So if they come in, they ask you about the grades. So I tell them out of here. So you want to study, if you're interested in grades, you should be, so that's one thing is I'm not an educator. I'm not in the education business, I'm in the research business. So I have a center called Extreme Events, Extreme Risk Institute. We keep changing the name. And we do research to help policymakers with some robust things. So I'm not really an educator. But sometimes I have to teach a class on extreme risk. And the first class, you have about 60, 70 people. My objective is to bring them down to 4. All right? So, but I'm not paid for teaching, incidentally. So I'm a researcher.
Right. Gentleman in the front here, let's get some diversity even in the seat location. And he has a beard. So.
Hi, Nassim. Is it better being a Cassandra when nobody wants to listen to you, or being an Oracle when everybody wants to listen to you?
Let me tell you, I hate the Oracle business, and I couldn't care less about it. Let me tell you, if you're in the business of saying the truth, you have to really not care. Sometimes you care, but overall you have to not give a damn about what people think. All right, so that's the idea. So but when you're a trader, typically you have complete different psyche. Most people, when they are in a business of communicating with others, they're judged on how people judge them. When you're a trader, all right, you're judged by your wallet. So you have the last laugh or the last cry. So I come from a different world. You see, I spent 21 years in a world where if people know what you're doing, all right, you're what we call a BS operator. You see. So, and when you look at finance from the outside, all you see are the BS operators. people who talk, give you theories, because these guys go on TV. But so this is, I come from the world where if you have the right answer over the long run, it's going to be vindicated. So you don't have to convince anyone. And as a matter of fact, if you can confuse them, even better. Right?
And you're a big proponent of skin in the game, right?
Yeah, okay, so let's talk now about skin in the game, about in policy making. That's one of the central characteristics of Antifragile. If you have more to gain than to lose, you're Antifragile, and vice versa. But unfortunately, there's a class of humans on this planet who have something to gain, but if they lose, guess what? Someone else loses. So they're not aligned ethically or even operationally. And I call them lack of skin in the game. So people who talk in predictive analytics and stuff like that, they can be wrong forever because they show you their good results. You see, they don't have skin in the game, so there's no filter. But when you have your neck on the line, there is a filter. So the reason I mean, you guys have a lot of car accidents in India, all right? But you would have more if people who didn't get into a car accident didn't die. In the States, okay, we don't have the imbalance in size of cars. Okay, and then highways don't have necessarily, some highways don't have trucks.
And no elephants on the road.
Yeah, but when you're on a highway, all right, you know someone can make a mistake and kill 30 people. But it doesn't happen. Why? Because these people are already dead. Because the risks, they cause risk to others, but they're also exposed to these risks. So eventually they exit the gene pool. So the bad risk takers end up entering the gene pool, and those who impose harm to others, but also to themselves, end up bankrupt. But the problem with bankers is that when they lose money, it's our money, all right? And when they make money, it's theirs, okay? So you can't have a filter. You see, with entrepreneurs, you have that filter. And that's the same with academia. Academics, they bloviate in economics, for example. It's a fraud. They bloviate. They didn't see they have the wrong models, all right? And then they spin a story after because they didn't see the crisis coming. But if they were exposed to the risk, they'd be blown up. So this is the idea of skin in the game. So ethically, when someone asks me about something, like what's the market doing, I tell them, I can't tell you where the market is going. I can tell you what I have. So if I make a mistake, I'm first to be harmed. And even psychologically, it gives you a different feeling because you feel honorable, you see. Think about skin in the game. In war, I don't know about your traditions of warriors, but in Mediterranean wars, the general is first in battle.
But is that changing with drone warriors?
Yeah, that's changing dramatically. The world today, not just drone warriors, everything. The world, the more you bureaucratize the world and intellectualize it and bring education into it, the more you have a class of people making decisions without skin in the game, all right? And that is the tragedy, all right? This is why you need to decentralize. For example, when you decentralize, the local mayor has skin in the game. He lives in a community, he drinks the water. A guy in Washington is pushing a button. It's an Excel spreadsheet. He doesn't feel shame if he runs into the people, you know, who are harmed by his mistake. It's anonymous. So this is where, you know, the structure of skin in the game, as the #1 creator of black swans, is absence of skin in the game.
Right. Next question.
Thanks for helping me. You know.
Maybe there's a youngster right in the back, looks like a student, so trying to average out the ages as well.
Even better if we can find a student with no hair.
Mr.
The world is so unfair to people without hair.
Mr. Taleb, I'm a big fan of your work. I was reading The Black Swan yesterday and I read Antifragile, where you made this statement that as a child in the Civil War years, you don't believe in structured learning environments. And in Black Swan, you also stated that experts in one domain may not necessarily be experts in other domains. So now as a student in an educational institute, this really scares me because I realize that I'm working for knowledge and skills that may not be valid 5-10 years from now. So based on the Antifragile and Black Swan theory, how do you suggest we make educational institutes, you know, more valid to those theories?
Okay, I've mentioned before that you should have, like what the Germans do. The Germans respect professors, okay, but keep them away from business, right? They have a high rate of apprentice, you know, they have apprenticeship as a mode.
The polytechnic.
Medicine is apprenticeship mode. It's not theoretical. You know, they give you some biology, then you forget it. You forget it because it doesn't match. So apprenticeship is the mode. So that's that one. The second one, there's something I call the Lindy effect about time and fragility. If you pick studies today, all right, that and what you know today would also have applied backwards 20 years ago, odds are what you know today would work in 20 years. So when I write, I mean, Fooled by Randomness is now 15 years old, this is publication. But this is a trick, is I wrote it and I said, if 20 years ago someone read that book, will he understand it? If the answer, or maybe not 100%, but will this be relevant to him? If you study something today that would have been relevant 20 years ago, it will be relevant odds, and all odds, 20 years from now. And so this is why an investment in mathematics is vastly greater, all right, than investment in something called psychology, which probably you can forget because there's pretty much nothing in the modern psychology literature that you cannot find in the classics, you see. And the interesting thing today, we're reading Montaigne, 500 years later. Montaigne was discussing stuff written 1,500 years before him, you see. And now reading him, and he survived beautifully. So this is sort of like if you care about what will happen to you when you're my age, you see, study subjects that were relevant before you were born and are still relevant today. You have to be relevant in both dimensions, right? Relevant today, relevant then, it will be relevant in the future.
Do we have time? One final question, very quickly.
No, either gender balance or hair balance. Okay. So far, they all have hair.
A bald lady, maybe. No, okay,
either a lady with the hair, or there's nobody bald in here.
Okay, so the only gentleman who's enthusiastic to bring up his hand very quickly.
He has hair, but he's okay. All right.
My question is, you've talked a lot about these thinking which apparently is reflective of human biases. If I have to sort of imbibe what you've talked about, what suggestions would you have for humans to do away with the biases which cause us to think in this manner? How do I unlearn some of these things?
Don't unlearn biases. Let me answer it. It's very simple. Change the world around you, all right? Instead of people trying to change, I wrote a book actually that nobody knows, and I'm glad. I didn't want to market it. Actually, it's here, called The Better Procrustes. It's a short book of aphorism. It's about a story of a gentleman who owned an inn, and people would come in, and those who were short, he would stretch them to fit the bed. That was it was called the stretcher nickname. And those who were too tall, he would cut their legs, all right, to fit the bed, right? So the Procrustean bed of civilization is making humans change to fit civilization, all right? Where instead of making civilization change to fit humans. So I have biases. I have a lot of biases. I'm very emotional. So I try to structure an environment in which they're not harmful. So you change your environment, no news, no this, no that. Plus there's something quite central about technology. It seems to me the best way you can predict if technology is not fragile is if it fits your human nature. In order to bring you back, you know, to your roots rather than alters. This is why the TV is very alienating a mode. You're sitting down watching some social planner lecture you, whereas communicating with this is a lot better and writing on an iPad brings us back to writing on a tablet that we've done for a long, you see? So I would say that don't worry about changing your biases, okay? I'm human. It's part of me to have biases. Just make sure they're not harmful, okay?
Great. Thank you so much for a terrific session.
Nicholas,
Nassim,
Taleb.
Thank you. He's got another session post-lunch in the Google Mughal tent, which is on Middle East, so do join him there as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Nassim Nicholas Taleb and Abhimanyu Radhakrishnan for a fascinating session. Now, unfortunately, Nassim Nicholas Taleb has to go to the press tent, so he won't be doing a signing this morning. Our next session will begin in about 5 minutes, so we'll do a quick turnaround here on stage. I'll just run you through what's going on in the other venues quickly. In Charbagh, the session going in at 11:15 is the twilight zone between Arabs and Israelis. In the Google Mogul tent, the session about to start is a history of the world in 12 maps.